Shalom, 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 everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. The next edition of Reading with Shilo. Reading with Shilo. We back. And I'm Shilo. Welcome back. Welcome back. So we're going to get back into it. The second part of chapter 1, The Valley of the Dry Bones, by Dr. Rudolphf R. Windsor, or by Rudolphf R. Windsor. The conditions that face Black people in America. I hope you're ready. There was a lot of history. Well, I think it's going to be a lot of historical stuff, dates, and things of that nature. So I hope you get ready. I'll show you the things that come up. If they have pictures or illustrations. And we'll see if we can push all the way to chapter 2. We got about like that much. We might be able to do it. We'll see. So, all right, well, we're going to get right into it. Sit down, get your drinks, popcorn, all that, whatever. Put your earbuds in and get ready to listen. Let's go. The Valley of the Dry Bones by Rudolphf R. Windsor. Copy written in 1986. 1986. Section 2. The Union League, Carpetbaggers and Scallywags. The Union League Incorporation, with the Freeman Bureau, made great progress in organizing and educating the freeman and poor whites in the political progress. The political area was all new to the freeman, and they needed a lot of knowledge and experience in order to compete with the hostile white society. These leagues were located all over the South, and the majority of the Black people belonged to them. When the meetings were being held, the Black people would stop their work to attend. The Union League was getting so strong that the ex-slave masters made many attempts to break them up. As a result, many Blacks had to arm themselves. In the process of the reestablishment of state governments in the South, the Black man had important allies in his rise to political power. First, these were masses of poor whites, and second, a large group of Northerners. These Northerners had come south with the Union Army and remained. Other than others were officials of the Freeman Bureau or some other social agency. The ex-slave masters termed these two groups scallywags and carpetbaggers. Scallywags and carpetbaggers. The word carpetbaggers was derived from the fact that these Northerners came south, often with all their belongings in carpet bags. The word scallywag is derived from a Shetland Islands, north of Scotland, and was first applied to the undersized, inferior pony. In light of this, when the old aristocracy of the South called the low-ranking whites by the name scallywag, they meant worthless or inferior people. Moreover, both carpetbaggers and scallywags were Republicans, the Black political personalities. With the coalition and assistance of the scallywags and carpetbaggers, the Blacks were able to build up a powerful Republican political machine in the South. Naturally, all of this could not have been possible without the passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments, which gave to the Black man citizenship and the right to vote, and the aid of the Freeman Bureau, the Union League, and the U.S. Army, and the Northern Blacks who came to the South to help their brothers and sisters. As a result of the assistance, many Blacks were elected to public office. When the Civil War ended, there were 5 million whites and 4 million Blacks in the South. Out of these numbers, 700,000 Blacks and 660,000 whites were registered to vote at the beginning of the Reconstruction period. Almost 200,000 whites could not register to vote or hold public office because of their participation in the rebellion. Pertaining to the number of registered blacks and white voters, these were large figures considering the fact that 18-year-olds and women could not vote in these years. As a result of the political organization of the new freemen, many blacks were elected to various public offices. Examples were the mayor of Natchez, Mississippi, my bad, Robert Wood, and W. Cooney, or Cooney. W. Cooney, who ran for mayor in Galveston, Texas. There were hundreds of black elected officials in the state legislatures of the Deep South. In South Carolina, there were 84 blacks in the first Reconstruction legislature. In the cities and towns, there were black judges and sheriffs. When was this? It don't say a year. Around 1865, I want to say. When did the Civil War end? So whenever the Civil War ended, this is when all this stuff. During the Reconstruction phase. In the state of Virginia, sent one black congressman to Washington. Georgia sent one. Alabama sent 3. North Carolina sent 4. Florida sent 1. Louisiana sent 1. Mississippi sent 1. South Carolina sent 8. Some of these states had black superintendents of education, major generals, speakers of the House of Representatives, associate justices of state supreme courts, secretaries, treasurers, and lieutenant governors. And there were 2 United States senators from the state of Mississippi, Hiram Revels and Blanche Bruce. Mississippi had one black lieutenant governor. South Carolina had 2, and Louisiana had 3. Let me see. Hiram Revels. Let me see if he's in this book. Revels. Hiram Revels. He's in here. 205. 205. Hyman Revels. Hyman Revels. Hyman Rhodes Revels. This is out of the Encyclopedia. Let me see where you can see it. The Encyclopedia of African American Heritage. Yeah, that sun is shining, man. Revels, Hiram Rhodes, 1822 to 1901. United States Senator, born free in North Carolina. Revels became an ordained minister in 1845 and served congregations in Maryland and several other states. During the Civil War, Revels helped recruit black soldiers and establish a school for freed slaves in St. Louis in 1868. He was elected to the Mississippi State Senate, and in 1870 was elected to the U.S. Senate by the Mississippi State Legislature. The Senate agreed to seat him only after a bitter debate, and he served only 1 year. After his return to Mississippi, he became president of Alcorn University. Revels was the first African American elected to either House of Congress. Hiram Revels. See, Blanche Bruce. Bruce, B-R-U. Bruce, he's in here too. 39. Ooh, you got a lot. Blanche Kelso Bruce, 1841 to 1898. U.S. Senator, born a slave. Bruce managed to acquire an education before running away to the free state of Kansas, where he opened a school. In 1865, he entered Oberlin College for a few months, then got a job on a riverboat. He settled in Mississippi in 1869, where he was elected to various offices, including sheriff, superintendent of education, and tax collector of Bolivar County. He also became a wealthy plantation owner. In 1874, Bruce became the second African American elected to the United States Senate from Mississippi. Hiram Revels was the first. During his term, he unsuccessfully opposed the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1878 as racially discriminatory. He also sought to integrate the armed forces and called for the investigation into the treatment of West Point cadet Johnson Whitaker, an African American who was beaten by other cadets, then accused of lying and self-mutilation when he complained. After the failure of the Freedmen's Saving and Trust Company, Bruce succeeded in helping depositors regain some of their money. I guess that also could go into some reasons why people don't want to. We might have to keep this close. Why people don't trust black banks. Hiram Revels and Blanche Bruce. Mississippi had one black lieutenant governor. South Carolina had two, and Louisiana had three. Lieutenant Governor P.B.S. Pinchback became governor for 43 days upon the impeachment of the previous governor. Although blacks held many offices in the South, they never elected any U.S. senators from South Carolina, even though they had the superiority of over 100,000 in population. Furthermore, the blacks had a population majority or a registered voter majority in the South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and Louisiana. But not once did these states elect a black governor. This was a sad state of affairs. Let us examine the social and psychological behavior of white and black people during the post-Civil War period in order to arrive at a reason why there were no black governors in these states. The blacks did not elect any black governors because some had fear in their hearts. Some thought that the office was a white man's domain. Some thought that whites had more brains. Some felt obligated to the carpetbaggers and scallywags, and others thought that they had to conciliate and pacify the whites, which I think they still think that. The senator from Mississippi, Hiram Revels, a black man, spent so much time conciliating hostile, deceptive white people that he alienated black people. This even happens today. Some blacks spend so much time in white society that the masses of the black people don't even consider them black anymore. Also, the white man used a psychological tool known as the power of suggestion. When the state convention met in South Carolina during this period, white men indicated to the blacks that it would be more diplomatic to elect a white chairman. This is tantamount to saying that only a white man could do the job. It is psychosocial brainwashing. It is psychosocial brainwashing. The people of suggestion, the power of suggestion is employed in our mass media today, in newspapers and on radio and television. It is so persuasive in our society that it would require a separate book to deal with that subject. Psychological suggestion in the mass media is a form of brainwashing. Psychological suggestion in the media is a form of brainwashing. Psychological suggestion in mass media is a form of brainwashing. As a result, the black people were more a victim to it because they may read fewer books. They may read fewer books and watch and listen to the sound boxes more than other groups. After the black man received his voting rights in 1868, it was the general feeling about whites that the black man should do the voting and the white the directing. It was the general feeling among whites that the black man should do the voting and the whites the directing. What they meant was that the whites would rule and hold the dominant positions. The whites took the paternalistic attitude toward the blacks. As a result, some blacks believed that they should take a back seat and side seat and not offend the sensibilities of these whites. We have a case in point that when the state convention met to nominate a governor in Louisiana during this period, the black politician, Pinchback, took a back seat and withdrew his name from nomination, thinking that it would be unwise to have a black governor the first time. This is one of the mistakes he made. He later regretted it, and blacks suffered from it in the future years. After Pinchback withdrew his name, there were two names remaining in nomination. Those were Warmoth, a white man, and Dumas, a black man. There was a tie between the two on the first ballot. Most of the delegates were black and previous slaves and did not like ex-slaveholders. Before the next ballot was cast, Warmoth stressed the fact that his opponent Dumas had owned slaves. When the ballot was cast and counted again, Warmoth won by 2 votes. The second mistake made here was that the black delegates did not forgive their own black brother. The second mistake made here was that the black delegates did not forgive their own black brothers. They should have elected Dumas, the lesser of the 2 evils, because they did not. They missed their chance. They missed their chance to have a black governor. Finally, by the time Pinchback decided to run for governor in later years, the whites had gotten complete control of the election machinery. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Excuse me. This is why blacks have repetitive setbacks, because they don't learn from history. Some say, I don't want to learn. I don't want to learn about that old slavery stuff. Oh, that's one you hear all the time. I don't want to learn about that old slavery stuff. Or I am not an African. I am an American. But most blacks are not treated like Americans, but as less than Americans. Although we do not have any black governors, nevertheless, we had a larger number of black elected officials in the South during the Reconstruction period than we have today. With this fact in mind, do you think we really advanced? The black politicians and their white allies changed many of the outdated, inhuman, and discriminatory laws that were on the books for many years in the Old South. These black-white state legislatures enacted better, more equitable, and more humane laws for everybody. Some of the highlights of these laws were the establishment of public schools. Under the old traditions, blacks and poor whites were excluded from schooling. General manhood suffrage, the granting of rights to females, such as divorce and the right to hold property, equity of civil rights. I think I heard somebody talking about that one time. This was a time because people was going to other places and leaving, and they had to give the women the right to be able to hold that property or to divorce them. They abolished the old slave laws, penal incarceration for debt. Penal incarceration for debt. The use of sitting in stocks, and the whipping post, and property requirements for voting. Under the old slave system, the masses of the poor whites who did not own property were prohibited from voting. Also, under the new system, the masses of the poor whites and the blacks who did not own property were now considered in state representation according to their mere population rather than by the ownership of property. At this time, I don't want to fail to mention the fact that these legislatures established social service institutions for the orphans, blind, disabled, and insane. As you can see, these were reforms of extensive magnitude. It was no wonder that the big plantation owners and other racist writers hated the black poor white coalition and the state governments of the South. In later decades, the struggle for social and labor rights developed into a fight between the rich and the poor, and the rich used the ideology of white supremacy to divide the poor white workers and the blacks. There will be more on this subject later. There will be more on this subject later. A seeming plus came to the black people when Congress passed the Civil Rights Bill of 1875, which gave blacks the right to equal treatment in hotels, public conveniences, and theaters and other places of public amusement. Possessing a sizable amount of political power in the states of the Deep South, the blacks were moving up and riding high on the saddle. What was the general mood of social life of blacks, at least on a higher level? What was the general mood and the social life of blacks, at least on a higher level? What was it? Were they going to clubs? Were they shucking and jiving? The great writer Lerone Bennett Jr. gives us a classic example. Negroes and whites were going to school together, riding on streetcars together and cohabitating, in and out of wedlock. Negro men were marrying white women in the South, but it was more fashionable. Investigators reported for white men to marry Negro women. Negro men were marrying white women in the South, but it was more fashionable, investigators reported, for white men to marry Negro women. An interracial board was running the University of South Carolina, where a Negro professor, Richard T. Greener, was teaching white and black youth metaphysics and logic. A man in his age went to mail a letter, and the postmaster was black. A man committed a crime, and in some counties was arrested by a black policeman, prosecuted by a black solicitor, weighed by a black and white jury, and sentenced by a black judge. It was enough to drive some men mad. It was enough to warp some men's judgment. Come with James S. Pike, a Northern reporter, into the South Carolina House of Representatives, the first Western assembly of its kind with a black majority. The speaker, Pike reports, is black, and the clerk is black. The doorkeepers are black. The little pages are black. The chairman of the Ways and Means Committee is black, and the chaplain is coal black. But this social atmosphere did not last long in the South. The forces of counter-revolution and reaction of the ex-slaveholders were at work undermining and eroding, slowly but surely, the foundation of black social, political, and civil rights all over the South. Intimidation and mass murder became the order of the day, and gradually the black man was deprived of all his civil rights. By the 1880s, the state governments in the Deep South had returned to the complete control of the plantation owners. How and why the ex-holders seized power. How and why the ex-slaveholders seized power. Before we involve ourselves in the heart of the issue that contributed to the seizures of political power by the plantation owners in the South, I want to list some of the inherent misfortunes and mistakes that were made as early as 1865 and onward. They were as follows: the pardoning of the rebels by President Andrew Johnson, the restoration of the plantations of the rebels, the disarming of the black troops of the Anti-Slavery Society in 1870. It should have been converted into the Anti-Jim Crow Society, the formation of the Ku Klux Klan in 1865, and the deaths of the two magnanimous white civil rights fighters, Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, who both sat on Congress and died in 1868 and 1874, respectively. These misfortunes and mistakes were the foundation of doom and facilitated the rapid political decline of the black man and made him an easy victim of super exploitation. Excuse me, let me go get, oh man, I need to give me something to drink. Give me something to drink. I'll be right back. Oh, I'll be right back. Oh, my bad. Land. In 1862, during the Civil War, the federal government issued the Confiscation Act. This act empowered the president to seize the plantations of rebels, and it was generally understood that the enormous estates would be divided up and distributed to the poor whites and the ex-slaves. Congressman Stevens unsuccessfully tried to get Congress to adopt the land distribution policy. Distribution of land taken from the big landowners was not an unusual thing. During the French Revolution, the new government seized the land and distributed it to the common people. Moreover, 400 million acres of land were confiscated from the landowners after the Russian Revolution handed it to the people. After the Russian Revolution and handed it to the people. The federal government never transferred large amounts of land to the millions of freed slaves in the South. Why? There is an extremely important reason for this, which we will explore shortly. After the Civil War, General Sherman gave large tracts of land to the blacks on Sea Islands off the coast of South Carolina with government approval, but the government welched on its promise. It pardoned the rebels and returned their land. The real government land policy was demonstrated in 1865 with the establishment of the Freeman Bureau. Federal policy at that time stated that the Bureau could rent land to the freemen. That ain't good. I don't want no rented land. Give me what you said you was gonna give me. The real government land policy was demonstrated in 1865 with the establishment of the Freeman Bureau. Federal policy at that time stated that the Bureau could rent land to the free man. However, with the restoration of the land to the rebels, this provision proved to be of little benefit to the freemen. The government had a number of options they could have taken. In 1862, the Congress passed the Homestead Act. It could have opened up large areas in the West and Northwest for the freemen, but they failed to do it. Why? If whites could not tolerate blacks in their own midst, they could have sent the blacks to the icebox of Alaska. Yet they failed to do this. Why? Damn, man, I wonder what Alaska would be like right now if they would have sent all the blacks up there. It'd have been cold, but I think we would have made it, man. Could you imagine us up there shooting elk and stuff? Man. Frederick Douglass proposed to the government that it set aside 1 million so that the freemen could buy land at easy terms. They failed to do this. Why? The government gave 23 million acres of land to the railroads, but had none for the ex-slaves. Why? Good questions. There were large tracts of land that the government never restored to the rebels because of the non-payment of taxes. In fact, speculators, not freemen, got most of this land. Why? In order to understand why the government facilitated refused land to whites and blacks in the or anywhere else for that matter, it is indispensable that we know the development of the labor movement in America. It is an established fact that industrialists, capitalists, and big bankers control this country. That the industrialists, capitalists, and big bankers control this country and many other countries. The big politicians are not free agents. Many industrialists, interest groups, and bankers control the politicians. This fact holds true today, as it did of the House of Representatives said. After looking around him, I see the representatives of 80 banks sitting as members of this House. The speaker said this during the Civil War. William Foster reveals to us that the Whig Party, the forerunner of the Republican Party, was dominated by Northern capitalist groups in alliance with the slaveholders of the South. Now read this. The same writer tells us that the pro-slavery Democratic Party, was controlled by the Southern planters in alliance with Northern banking of commercial and interest. It is a fact that many Northerners prohibited from the slave trade and the exploitation of the blacks and poor whites in the South. It was the Northern bankers and commercial interests who constructed the ships that bought the slaves. It was the Northern bankers and commercial interests who constructed the ships that brought the slaves to America. It was these same Northern commercial interests that manufactured the chains, fetters, and shackles that bound the hands of the free and the feet of slaves. The plantation owners shipped much of the cotton, sugar, tobacco, and other raw materials produced by slave labor to the North to be manufactured. History and research shows that the Democratic Party in the South had the North amassed great wealth from the institution of slavery. Man. The Democratic Party in the South. History and research shows us that the Democratic Party in the South and the North amassed great wealth from the institution of slavery. These northern commercial magnates ran for office in the U.S. Congress or backed other politicians who supported their business interests. In the South, many slaveholders held important offices in the House and Senate of the United States. One such slaveholder was Senator Jefferson Davis of Mississippi, who owned a 10,000-acre plantation of hundreds of slaves. A senator, 10,000 acres. Holding high positions in the government from the presidency and on down, these Democrats in the North and the South made the abolition of slavery very difficult. The poor and Democratic Party were finally broke when the Democratic South seceded from the United States and became the Confederate States after 1861. The newly formed Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, became the dominant party during the Civil War and the Reconstruction period in 1861 through 1880. What did the Republican Party gain from the war? 1, the control of the federal government. 2, the building up of stronger industries in the North. 3, an increase in tariff against foreign competition, which also permitted Northern industrialists access to Southern raw materials. Number 4, the Northern capitalists moving into the South to begin the process of industrialization. And number 5, the Northern capitalists gaining of poor whites and blacks as political allies. With the political support of the workers, farmers, middle class, poor whites, and blacks, the Republican Party was able to win the national elections in 1868 and 1872, and the close elections of 1876 and 1880. Man, I feel like I'm in history class. Where is this history when you take history in school? Where is this? Where is this history? The diabolical Republican double cross of the black man. We call it diabolical. The diabolical Republican double cross of the black man. During the Republican administrations, they abolished slavery and gave the black man citizenship and the right to vote. In 1875, they even passed a civil rights bill that permitted black people to ride in public conveyances and to enter hotels, inns, and public amusements. Because of the liberality because of the liberality of the Republican Party, blacks were zealously dedicated to the Republicans. They voted the Republican ticket with the religious fervor. Mr. Bennett and Mr. Foster tells us that any blacks in those days who voted the Democratic ticket were treated like a traitor. By the way, the black people did not become diehard Democrats until the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration. The records reveal that the black registration and voting exceeded 85% in the Republican Party. After the national elections of 1872 and 1876, the Republican Party showed less and less interest in the enforcement of civil rights. They abandoned the black man to the whims of his arch enemies, the wizards of the invisible empire of the Ku Klux Klan. How and why did this happen? It might have to be a part 3. It might have to be a part 3. Chapter 1 was pretty long. The election sellout of 1877. The two principal candidates in the national election of 1876 were Samuel Tilden, a New York Democrat, and Rutherford Hayes. Rutherford. I wonder if people still name their children Rutherford. Rutherford, get your ass out that tree, Rutherford. Rutherford Bartholomew. Rutherford Hayes. What's your name? Rutherford? And Rutherford Hayes, a Republican of Ohio. Two main public issues militated against the Republican Party were the economic crisis of 1873 and the graft scandals. In spite of this, the Republicans stressed the insurrection of the Democrats during the war and their terror through the Reconstruction period. The Democrats campaigned for full autonomy for the South. This meant the restoration of complete power to the plantation owners and their descendants. The election was a close one. According to the final Republican count, Hayes received 4,033,768 votes, and Tilden received 4,285,992 votes. With a plurality for the Democratic Tilden of 252,224 of the popular vote. Now, when the electoral votes were counted, Tilden received 203 against Hayes's 166. The Republicans contested the election returns from 4 states: South Carolina, Louisiana, Oregon, and Florida. That sounds familiar. The Republicans contested the election returns from 4 states: South Carolina, Louisiana, Oregon, and Florida. No doubt there was widespread fraud in the South. With the mechanism of terror employed to keep blacks away from the polls, the Republican challenge left the undisputed votes at 184 for Tilden and 166 for Hayes. That was 1 vote lacking for Tilden in the Electoral College, leaving the results in 4 states in dispute. In order to resolve this critical problem, Congress formed a federal commission consisting of 5 senators, 5 congressmen, and 5 Supreme Court justices. On the commission were 7 Democrats and 8 Republicans. The commission counted, recounted, and questioned the returns from the disputed states. I don't know how they counted that stuff. Were all these ballots counted by hand? Were all these ballots counted by hand? Wow. Some long days if it was so. 1, 2. Man, there's some long days if that was so. The crisis dragged on for 3 months, and the excitement, tension, and suspicion got higher. The Democrats filibustered in Congress in order to interrupt the orderly counting. Some Democrats called for an army of 100,000 to march on Washington and to install Tilden into office. Man, they wanted that boy in there. They want the army to come bring him in now. There were other Democrats who thought that if they could delay things until Inauguration Day, the nation would be without a president and on the verge of another civil war. The capitalists wanted to get back to normal business. The politicians rushed back and forth towards secret rooms, exclaiming, "Compromise, compromise." There can be no compromise without both sides surrendering something. The capitalist Republicans surrendered the black people as a sacrifice on the burning altar of the South. The capitalists surrendered. The capitalist Republicans, let me make sure it's read right. The capitalist Republicans surrendered the black people as a sacrifice on the burning altar of the South. Like a lamb. A lamb, a goat, a turtle dove. Man. Trust in the system really don't, a lot of times, when looking at a lot of this history, man, when the scriptures tell you to prove a friend, and you look back at the history, and you can see, man, these people got a history of turning on you. They got a history of being for self. Why would we want to, as a collective, still be under a system that we know is flawed like that? Why are we so, stuck in that brainwashing? The Republican Hayes agreed that if the Democrats would not challenge the decision of the commission, the Republicans had the majority. The Republicans would permit the Democrats to take control of the 2 remaining Republican states, South Carolina and Louisiana. The Democrats could have state rights. Damn, man. And Haynes, upon taking office, would withdraw federal troops from the South. The crux of the sellout was giving the South the freedom and right to put the black man in his place. Boy, you better get in that house, boy. You want to vote? Got something for you, boy. This meant in a semi-slave condition. Exactly. This meant in a semi-slave condition to be exploited politically, socially, and economically, with the North looking in the other way. The subjugation of the black man was easily accomplished because in general, he owned no property, no homes, and had no place to go but to remain in a state of dependency on the hostile plantations. The federal government never gave land to the black man. The federal government never gave land to the black man. Because it was the intention of the Republican industrialists who controlled Congress to keep the black man landless and weak. It was the intention of the Republican industrialists who controlled Congress to keep the black man landless and weak in order to participate in his super exploitation. For example, by working him long hours at low wages. This way, the rich get richer and hundreds of times over, and the poor get poorer in this wicked sharecropping system. Let's see how long we're gonna go. Maybe about 3 more pages. When I say 3, I'll be talking about like front and back. That apple was good. The Workers' Rebellion. Workers in Rebellion. Yeah, we're on page 30 right now, and chapter 2 doesn't start till page 51. So, yeah, I think about 3 more pages. 3 more pages. We're gonna go to 36. Well, that's 6 more pages. We're gonna read to page 36. And we'll stop at page 36. We'll stop here. Give me bomb. And then part 3 will be the end of. I'll do a part 3, and part 3 will be the end of chapter 1. Excuse me. Workers in Rebellion. Workers in Rebellion. Workers in Rebellion. Another reason for the Hayes betrayal of 1877 was the fact that the old political coalition of the Republican Party was breaking up at the termination of the war. In the North, new political alignments took place. The Northern aristocrats, after the war, realized the existence of a threatening phalanx of adamant new advisors. The middle class, farmers, and workers, in an uprising against the cruel industrialist exploitation. These labor movements began to take shape in the West and the North. The workers began to organize trade unions and to develop political action against their previous allies. The workers began to organize trade unions and to develop political actions against their previous allies, the greedy capitalists. During the 20 to 30 year period after the Civil War, they executed the most bitter strikes in America. The middle class in the northern cities began to direct the battle line against the big trust companies, which were hurting the little manufacturers and small businessmen. Also, the farmer began to battle the high stipulations of the railroads and bankers. Within 10 years, these upheavals began to operate in the South. Philip Fauner describes the conditions among the industrial states: militant strikes, unemployment demonstrations, and the growth of independent political action heralded the fact that the class struggle was sharpening. Frightened by the popular upheaval, the masters of capital began to look with favor at the prospect of an alliance with reactionary elements, racists in the South. Together, they could build a solid front against the people movement, assured by the Southerners' conservatives that the status of the tariff, the national bank, and the national debt would not be disturbed. Northern capitalists no longer hesitated. It was this fear of the unification It was this fear of the unification of the labor masses of the North with the poor whites and black masses of the South that motivated the Northern industrialists, the Republicans, and Hayes to ally themselves with the white racists and to betray the black man in 1877. William Foster says, in this raw deal, Hayes never consulted the leaders of the Negro people. He considered the Negroes, who were loyal supporters of the Republican Party, to be strictly expendable, and he proceeded on that basis. It was a cold-blooded sellout. That was to cause boundless misery and hardships to the Negro people and gravely handicap the fight for American democracy over many decades. For 75 years, an all-out struggle for supremacy existed between the Southern planters and the Northern industrialists. This struggle climaxed in the Civil War and the terrible period thereafter. From 1801 to 1876, slavery, or the black issue, was the main national political question of both the Democratic and Republican parties. Mr. Hayes' deal of 1877 drastically transformed this state of affairs by mutually terminating the open fight between the planters and the industrialists. As a result, it relegated the black question into a lesser position of a national political issue. The black people began once more to influence national politics. This new influence was attributed to the fact that a larger proportion of the black population of the South had migrated to the North, where they were permitted to vote. After the Hayes sellout, the Northern capitalists began to employ in their interest both the Republicans and Democrat parties. These two parties became Northern capitalist parties. These two parties became Northern capitalist parties. These two parties became Northern capitalist parties. It did not matter which one won the election. The Northern capitalist concerns were protected. That's right, because they had both of them. The Humiliation of Frederick Douglass. The Humiliation of Frederick Douglass. And I still want to get one of his books. I've never read a Frederick Douglass book, so Frederick Douglass became the most important orator and leader of the black people from 1850 to 1875. He worked relentlessly for the abolition of slavery, editing several newspapers. Furthermore, he traveled extensively throughout America, speaking on behalf of his people and the Republican Party, which had done so much for the benefit of the ex-slaves. It appeared that, in light of the growing labor troubles in the North and the West, and the new political alignment of the industrialists with the Southern planters, Douglass failed to understand and to deal properly with these new political changes. Consequently, he was unable to indicate the next fighting line or strategy for the black people. In retrospect, it seemed that as the Republican Party became less useful to the black man, Douglass should have urged the black people to support the new Populist Party, which was a rapidly growing party of workers and farmers in the North and the West and had begun to move into the South. This party was a new alternative. It seemed to me that Douglass had suffered from the condition of confusion, deception, and transformation shock. Some writers say that he did not speak out at the crucial time against the Hayes sellout because of the changes of attitude of the Republican Party. Douglass seems to have been in a state of shock and disbelief. Undoubtedly, he was confused on the proper course of action to take. Considering the fact that the Democratic Party was worse than the Republican, then worst of all, Douglass became a victim of deception. Hayes, the very man that sold out the black people, maneuvered Douglass into a position of neutrality by appointing him United States Marshal of Washington, D.C. This appointment and his future appointments as recorder of deeds and minister to Haiti rendered Douglass ineffective as a strategist for the civil rights struggle. Hayes humiliated Douglass by even offering him such an insignificant position. Douglass was a brilliant man of international stature. He had traveled to Europe and had discussions with President Lincoln, Johnson, and Grant. Moreover, Hayes had had the nerve to offer him a job as a policeman when other black men were sitting in the state legislatures and in Congress of the United States. Are black people so blind as to accept on one hand few crumbs and lose, on the other hand, all the accumulated advantages won through blood, sweat, and tears? Are black people so blind as to accept on one hand few crumbs and lose, and on the other hand, all the acclimated advantages won through blood, sweat, and tears? This is just what happened for Frederick Douglass. This is just what had happened to Mr. Frederick Douglass. Mr. Douglass should have known better. There was earlier evidence that the system did not want black people to sit to the left or right hand of power. Back in 1863, Douglass had visited Lincoln and plans had been designed to place Douglass in charge of the recruitment of black soldiers. He had met the Secretary of War, Stanton. Believing that everything had been arranged, Douglass closed down his newspaper and prepared to assume his new assignment. However, Mr. Stanton reneged on his promise because the position was too prestigious for him to place a black man in such an important assignment. During Johnson's and Grant's administrations, recommendations had been made to appoint Douglass head of the Freedmen's Bureau and to assign him to the post of minister to the black nation of Haiti and the Caribbean Sea. But these plans never materialized during these administrations. The Second Civil War. The real terroristic war existed in the South from 1865 to 1925. Although the federal government of the United States officially ended the Civil War in 1865, the South waged another civil war of political, economic repression, intimidation, and murder against the black man. After the Hayes sellout, he withdrew the federal troops from the South. This deliberate act gave the white racists a free hand to finish the final phase of the complete suppression of the black people. Here are listed some events and facts that indicate that virtual civil war existed. And there's about almost 30 of them. And when we finish the 30, that's going to be it. We're going to stop after we finish these. Number one, secret Confederate Army personnel were organized by the Confederate General Forrest. His secret army units were called Ku Klux Klan in 1865. Number two, the National Conference of the Ku Klux Klan met in Nashville, Tennessee in 1867. Number three, there were 3 race riots in Louisiana between September and October of 1868. I believe they had one here. They had one here in Opelousas, in my hometown. Number 4, Governor Holden proclaimed a state of rebellion in parts of North Carolina in 1870. Number 5, on March 6, 1871, a race riot took place in Meridian, Mississippi. Number 6, whites massacred more than 65 blacks at Grant Parish, Louisiana in 1873. Number 7, Ku Klux Klansmen took 16 blacks from a jail in Tennessee and shot them in 1874. A race riot in Vicksburg, Mississippi, 35 blacks were killed in 1874. Number 9, the governor of Mississippi declared martial law after rioters killed several black political representatives in 1874. Number 10, more than 10 were killed in race riots in Yazoo City, Mississippi in 1875. Number 11, More than 20 blacks were killed in race riots in Clinton, Mississippi in 1875. Number 12, a request for federal troops to protect the rights of black voters in Mississippi was rejected in 1875. Number 13, 5 blacks were murdered in Hamburg, South Carolina in 1876. Number 14, the racial conflict got so bad that President Grant sent federal troops to Florida and South Carolina in 1876. Number 15, all federal troops were withdrawn from the South to give the white races a complete free hand to deal with the blacks in 1877. Number 16, the traitor President Hayes appointed Frederick Douglass U.S. Marshal and for Washington, D.C. in 1877. The position rendered Douglass ineffective and was equal to making him a Boy Scout. Number 17, because of economic and political repression, blacks fled the South in 1879. Number 18, in Danville, Virginia, a race riot broke out in 1884. Number 19, more than 18 blacks were killed in Carrollton, Mississippi in 1886. Number 20, Wilmington, North Carolina, was a place where 8 blacks were killed in 1898. Number 21, in New Orleans, whites burned a black school and 30 homes in 1900. 22, the Supreme Court upheld the Alabama Constitution, which disenfranchised blacks in 1903. Number 23, martial law was proclaimed in Atlanta, Georgia, after 10 blacks and 2 whites were killed in 1906. Number 24, a race riot raged for 5 days in Springfield, Illinois. Number 25, the Ku Klux Klan spread like wildfire in the South and the West. The estimated membership in 1915 was 4 million. Man. Estimated number. 26, race riots took place in Philadelphia. 4 were killed. In Chester, Pennsylvania, 5 were killed. Both events took place in 1918. 27, the governor of Oklahoma said that the state of rebellion and insurrection existed because of the Klan activities. As a result of these activities, he proclaimed martial law in 1923. And 28, in Washington, D.C., 25,000 hooded Klansmen paraded to demonstrate their ideology and strength in 1925. This is only a partial list of riots and murders committed against black people, and it does not include the individual cases of murder which number in the thousands. Furthermore, I am aware of the fact that the numerous race riots and murders transpired after the year 1925. And we're going to stop there. We are going to stop there. So that has been part 2. Part 2 of chapter 1 of the Valley of the Dry Bones by Dr. Rudolphf R. Windsor, man. A lot of history. You know, there's a lot of murders, a lot of stuff going on. You know, a lot of people do say they don't want to hear about that stuff, you know. They don't want to hear about the slavery times or the old days. But if you don't know your past, you are bound to repeat it, and you definitely don't know your future. So it's best to figure it out now. Figure it out while you can before you be in a position where you got your children and your parents didn't teach you the things that they needed to teach you for you to go ahead and not be in the same position they was in. You know, you'll be, you know, swearing that you're Democrat or Republican. You don't even know the truth behind being either one of those or what. According to his stuff, I'm coming, son. All right. According to his stuff, the Republican, you know, all the damage the lies that was told, the damage the Republican and Democratic Party did to us, shouldn't be nothing. But you know, that's what it is. Till next time, man. Till next time. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll definitely be back Shilo out. Move. Shilo out. We'll be back with part 3 of chapter 1.
Chapter 1.
Shalom. Shilo out.
Shalom. Shalom.